So we've been finally, I guess, finished the book of Genesis after a year, but there's a lot to it. And as far as that goes, I don't think. Okay, as far as that goes, honestly, I could continue to talk about Joseph because there's just so much in that one story that is so relevant to the end times and everything. But it's like I told Hannah after she taught the last time. I think I'll just move on because I'm afraid of boring everybody to death. I just keep on and on going with Joseph. So I love Joseph too, but again, I don't know how much y'all can take because you know how I am. I tend to just keep digging and digging and digging, and I just don't want to bore anybody with. So we have not read the whole story of Joseph, so I was just going to kind of sum up a few things real quick, and then I was going to move on to the book of Exodus. But basically we've talked about everything at some point or time already. So when all the brothers and everybody finally does get to Egypt, okay, and they discover who Joseph is, Joseph of course puts them through a test, and really Joseph only wants to see Benjamin, because at that time he has put all of this in his past, and he is really more interested in seeing Benjamin and forget the rest of the family, because I think he even thinks his daddy was in on it. So, but when he begins to hear his brothers, and he begins to understand that things went wrong that they even did not intend, and how that the daddy thought he was dead all these years, and that's why he had not come looking for him, and all of that. So he gives up sort of his revenge, okay, and he begins to cry and to weep. All right, and so of course we know the rest of the story, how that the whole family comes down to Joseph in Egypt. Now, I want to back up to Genesis 49, and I want to read a couple of things here, and I don't have any notes on this. I was going to go, I actually had forgot that I wanted to do this.
You said chapter 49?
Genesis chapter 49, and I want to read this blessing now, after we know everything that we know about Joseph. I want to read this blessing that Jacob pronounces it's his last words to his sons. And I want to read what he says to Joseph in chapter 49 and verse 22. He said, "Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the mighty hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, by the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you." I want to stop right there. There's a lot more, but I want to talk about this in a little bit more depth, because there's depth here that I never caught until I really began to study. And what the rabbis say here, specifically Rabbi David Foreman and some other ones, is that Jacob here is going back, and he is now proclaiming what has happened to Joseph. So when he says the archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him, is speaking about what his brothers caused to happen to him, and how he was taken into slavery, and how they subjected him. Okay, but specifically his brothers caused these dilemmas to come upon him. Even though they didn't do it outright, they caused it. Okay, because they left him in the pit and somebody got him. Then this next scripture, it says, "But his bow remained in strength, and his arms of his hands were made strong by the mighty God of Jacob." So what they say is that Joseph was like an archer that had his grips on the bow, and then he had it pulled back like this. In other words, remember I said that when they first come down to Egypt, he sort of wanted revenge on his brothers for what he thought had happened, and that his daddy was even probably in on it, okay? So he had the bow back like this in strength, and it was ready to and let go at his brothers. Got me?
Yeah.
But he did not. So the bow was pulled back.
Oh yeah, so he could have done anything he wanted to him when he got him down to Egypt.
Exactly. He could have done anything he wanted. So his bow was pulled back. Just like it said, his bow remained in strength. In other words, it's in strength when it's pulled back. It's not in strength once it's let go.
Right.
But his bow remained in strength. And his arms, the strength of his arms in that position, were made strong by the mighty God of Jacob, that he did not follow through with revenge on his brothers or his family. Instead, the strength, he let it back down and did not, but went the other way. And I had never really understood exactly what that meant. But that's what they say in the Hebrew, that's the picture of, is that he had the chance to do anything to them that he wanted, but instead, he let it back down and did not.
The battle to the Lord.
He gave the battle to the Lord.
And had mercy.
And had mercy. Exactly. He had mercy. And so it goes on, of course. I'll just read the rest, the rest of the blessing. He said, but by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Now this goes back, of course, all the way back to Genesis 31, where Jacob spends the night, has the vision of the angels going up and down the ladder, and puts the pillar stone and sets it up. So this is the stone of Israel. And this is the one now that, of course, made Joseph strong. It says, by the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you with the blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb, the blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who is separate from his brothers. Now, that is the blessing over Joseph, and what we see in that is a firstborn blessing.
Right, that's the birthright blessing.
That is the birthright blessing in him getting a double portion of everything that his father had. Now, remember that I told you, and Hannah also, we carried on, that there was a test going on for Joseph here, right? So, why? Because Joseph was to be a leader of the family and his descendants, and they are, and they have been. All throughout Israel's history, one leader usually came from Ephraim and the other one from Judah. So there's a split blessing going on here. Joseph gets the firstborn blessing of double portion. But Judah, now if you go over and read what Jacob said to Judah in 49 and 9, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Now, there again, the rabbis say that Judah here is that lions, and from the prey, he's gone up. In other words, Judah could have killed Joseph, is what Jacob is really saying here. Joseph was the prey. Okay? So Joseph was in a position that literally the brothers were listening to Judah. Judah could have said, let's kill him. And that's what they would have done. And Joseph was in a predicament. He couldn't do anything about it. But Judah had the prey right where he wanted him. But he come up from his prey and did not devour him. Okay, so both of these blessings that Jacob's speaking has reference to Joseph and what was done to him. All right. Now let me back up. I didn't start at the very beginning. I jumped ahead of myself. Verse 8. Judah, you are he who your brothers shall praise. His name means praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Now that's something that was said to Joseph. right? Joseph had the dream that they were going to bow down to him, and we know that did come to fulfillment when they all came down to Egypt. But of course, this is more prophetically speaking of this line of authority blessing that's going to be on Judah. And then Judah is a lion swept from the prey. My son, you have gone up. He bows down and goes down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Shiloh means the one who it belongs to, the one whose right it is. Okay? And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's coat to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. I already taught on a lot of this. I'm not going back through it. But this is the split of the blessings. So while Joseph gets the double portion, his numbers are going to... Joseph's numbers of his descendants are going to be greater than anybody else's, Brother Chuck. Right. And that's where we come in. Right. In the nations. Right. Because it's from Joseph that the nations are so numbered. Okay? Mm-hmm. And blessed. And which most of the Christians that they don't know it are from. Okay? But now Judah gets the other half of that blessing, which is the line of authority. Okay? And he's the one, we've seen this split before. We've seen this split before of the dual blessing split between two. Okay? But so this is Judah. He's going to have the authority, the kingship, but Joseph gets the double portion. Now, if you go back to Abraham and what God said to Abraham about your descendants shall be as the stars of the heaven, which are innumerable, except to God, because in Job it says he knows every one of them by name. But we can't, because there's too many of them. We can't even see them all. Now, I want to ask you this, if you have a problem with what I said about Ephraim and all the nations and the Christians probably coming in through Joseph, is that Jews make up less than 1% of the world's population. They can be numbered. They've always been able to be numbered. So how do you get that prophetic? Now, of course, it still could be numbered. We know there's 9 billion people, 9 billion people in the world today. That's a number that can still be numbered. But at the same time, it means a great, great host, very, very large. Less than 1% of the world's population at any time in history does not denote a number so large that it's hard to count. Right. So we're missing something if we think that that's it. And it comes in the nations. It comes in those 10 northern tribes. Because the southern was only Judah and Benjamin and most of the Levites. All the other ones were the northern kingdom that was carried away, spread out all over the world, and lost their identity. That's where the multiplicity of the promise of Abraham comes in. All right. So having said all that, we know that that Joseph was 110 when he died. He lived in Egypt for 93 years in all, because he got there when he was 17. He lived 110. So he lived there for 93 years in all. He was about approximately 42 years old when his family came down to Egypt. So that means that for 51 years, he lived with his family in Egypt for 51 years before he died. Jacob lived 17 years in Egypt and then died. So, this is where we pick up in Exodus.
Before you go there, can I back
Yes.
you up
Yes.
to the first part you read, where it said Joseph is a fruitful bough and his branches
Ran over the wall.
over the wall. Would that be referred to the dispersion?
Yes, yes. Goes over the wall and spreads out everywhere. Yes. All right. So now I want you to think about Joseph. We know that he parallels Messiah. And there's so many ways, and hopefully I know that me and Hannah have mentioned so many of these ways. We know he was thrown into the pit. The grave is called a pit. Sheol is called a pit. We know that he, oh goodness, how do I even start this? We know that he was rejected by his own brother, right? We know that Joseph lost his identity. We know that Yeshua's identity has been lost to the nations. He's been made basically a Greek god and not a Jewish Messiah. Okay? And he's going to be revealed in the future for just who he is and has always been, in that he was born a Jew, he lived as a Jew, he died as a Jew, he's coming back as a Jew.
Amen.
And not a Greek Iusis, or however you say that, Iusus, or whoever, right?
You're not gonna be American.
He's not going to be an American. He's going to be Jewish through and through, just like he's
They
always
don't call him
been.
Jesus.
And they won't be calling him Jesus or Jesus or any. I think they will all know his name, right? Because he's a Jewish Messiah. All right, and of course the similarities go on and on and on and on and on. He was exalted, as Joseph was exalted to the right hand of Pharaoh. Yeshua is exalted to the right hand of God. All right, everything was put in Joseph's, everything. He was the vicar, if you will, like the Roman Catholic Church uses. Okay, he was the vicar of the Pharaoh. Pharaoh did just exactly what Joseph said. Likewise, Yeshua is what? He's totally in control at this present time, right? So, I mean, the similarities, we've talked about a lot of them, they just go on and on and on. But think about this. Joseph was the very first Israelite to live in diaspora.
Say that again?
Joseph was the very first Israelite to live in diaspora that we know of. There may be some that we're not told. There probably were. But as far as dispersion.
Oh,
He was outside the land.
Outside the land, outside his family. Right?
Right.
Okay. So how, I have to ask this and bring it to us in this day and time. How did that dispersion of Joseph affect Joseph? He forgot who he was, right? He looked like an Egyptian. He smelled like an Egyptian. He knew the Egyptian language. His brothers didn't even recognize him.
Right.
He looked like an Egyptian. He lived like an Egyptian. He married a high priestess.
He became as an Egyptian.
He became as an Egyptian.
But he never forgot who he was.
No, he never forgot who he was. But I'm just saying that's how it affected him. Does everybody see that?
Right.
He assimilated. He was happy where he was. He assimilated into the culture of Egypt.
Can we say his mentality was that of an Egyptian?
Yes. He had to be, yeah. And he said, I forgot my father's house, right? All that's behind me. God's blessed me here. That's what he named his two children. One, I forgot my father's house. The other one, he's made me fruitful here in my new family, in my new place, right? So, he even had a new daddy. The new daddy was Pharaoh. He did everything for him that his other daddy hadn't. Believed his dreams, exalted him, gave him new clothes. Okay?
he was content where he was.
He was. Now, if you bring that to us,
Oh my.
we are living in diaspora, or the dispersion. How has that affected us? The exact same way. We look like a pagan, we act like a pagan. I'm talking about historically, right? We look like a pagan, we act like a pagan, we have adopted pagan things.
Yes.
We've been comfortable in the world and assimilated where we have gone. Huh?
You quit teaching with the med.
Well, that's where we've been.
That's the truth.
We have become American, we've become whatever, Irish, wherever. We have all, even the Jews, okay, for the most part, when they went to Egypt, when they went to Babylon, they adopted Egyptian ways. When they went to Babylon, they adopted Babylonian ways. When they come out of Babylon, if you want to know where the months of the Hebrew years, Ayar, Nisan, Adar, they're all Babylonian names. That's the names of the Babylonian months. Because God didn't have names for his months. It was first month, second month, third month, right? So these names that we call are in Hebrew, the Hebrew months, like I said, Nisan, Adar, all of them.
They're not really Hebrew.
They're not Hebrew names. They're Babylon. Why? They assimilated in Babylon. They brought that out of Babylon with them. We cannot deny that we, just like Joseph, have become comfortable and assimilated wherever we were dispersed around the world. And that's what Jeremiah says. Okay? We inherited the lies of our fathers. Because as our forefathers way on back got dispersed to all of these areas, if you tell a lie long enough, it becomes truth. We accepted all these pagan things and we incorporated them into our religious belief systems, our daily lives, in every way. But then in Jeremiah it says that we inherited these lies, but that he says in the end of time that we're going to wake up. And he says you're going to come and say, I inherited lies of my fathers. I want to come back to you. As Zechariah said, you're going to call me husband, right? I want to come back to you. And then for the greater Exodus, that parallels this first Exodus that we're fixing to talk about, we are going to begin to cast off a lot of those things that we assimilated and picked up. And we're going to, in order to get out of this current place that we're all in around the world, the scriptures tells us what we're going to have to do. The same thing that the Israelites had to do in Egypt. And that is, when the bondage gets severe enough, we're going to say, God, get us out of here. Baruch haba Hashem Adonai. What did he tell him? I'm not coming back until you say, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai. Or blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Right. The bondage is not strong enough yet. Most of us are still happy right where we are.
That's why when you try to bring the truth of Hebrew roots into a
That's right.
multi-evangelical Christians, they kick back.
Exactly, kick back. But what you see now going on, okay, and I really didn't have any of this wrote down. Okay, but what you see now going on, I don't know about the whole world, I can only speak for America, okay? But I think it's probably worldwide, is now you see the mainstream Christian denominations, of which I came out of one, most everybody in here did, okay, is that we see them beginning to adopt these Jewish things. They're bringing in the shofar. They're bringing in, oh, this is the feast of whatever.
And at the same time that this rebirth is happening, there's oppression from outside and from within, and the true believers are going to adopt what we're doing, and the others are going to turn on us.
Exactly.
And the persecution is going to get stronger and harder.
That's right. Just like as Israelites were in Egypt, just gets harder and harder and harder.
Right. And it's going to be like
but the real ones are going to grasp the Sabbath and other things.
That should be the separation of sheep and goats that Yeshua talked about in the last page. Am I right?
Well,
in a sense,
in a sense, but not.
Okay.
There's a literal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but this.
And the Christians are saying, I want the leeks and onions of Egypt. I don't want what you have because it makes me change.
And they don't like change. But I know a lot of Christians now from mainstream denominations, I'll say a lot, I know several, that are asking questions about the Sabbath.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They're wanting to keep Sabbath, and some of them are keeping Sabbath their own way that they understand. Of course, they're still going to Sunday church, and that's fine. But they're beginning to say, I want to keep Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so The Chosen has done, just for one example, the series, The Chosen has done a lot to open them up to, hey, Jesus, hey, he was a Jew. And they're beginning to say, oh, I want to say that prayer. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has whatever. Or the morning. They're beginning to, oh, I like that. So they're beginning to incorporate, whereas before they were incorporating all of these pagan things. Now they're beginning to say, oh, I want to incorporate that into my life. It's still a mixing and mingling, but you see, they're waking up. Does everybody see that? They're beginning to wake up because the identity was lost.
Even as the Israelites went back to the land, they're taking what they have assimilated back, and that's changing too. For
That's right.
Messianics over there.
change going on if you pay close attention. But just as Joseph was one man that saved his whole was one man
Yes.
that saves the whole world. So that's another parallel between the two. All right. So now we want to move on to we covered the death of Joseph and the death of Jacob. How that Jacob at the end of his life wanted to know, whose child are you, Joseph? Are you Pharaoh's? Are you mine? We talked about that. And Joseph, remember who he was. He was Jacob's child. And of course, Jacob made a promise, take me back to the land. Joseph knew who he was, and so he told them, I want to be taken out of here. Don't leave my bones in Egypt. But when y'all leave, because he knew the prophecy given to Abraham, when y'all leave, take my bones with you. And of course, we find in Exodus that they did. They took Joseph's bones with them when the Exodus occurred.
Something a little different. Joseph was the first of the lineage of the patriarchs buried out, other than Rachel, buried outside of the cave of Macpelon.
Yeah, that's true.
She was coming back to get
He
the
was-
bones of those.
He
that
was
were
buried in Shechem.
Yep.
Joseph was buried in Shechem, which was an area that was also given to the children of Joseph by Joshua. All right, so now, of course, we know when Jacob dies, his brothers thought, well, Joseph's surely going to kill us now because Daddy's dead. Now he's going to take revenge on us. But Joseph, of course, tells them, no, I'm not going to harm you. All of this that Satan meant for evil, God turned it around for good, for your salvation. And that's the way it's going to be with Yeshua. Okay? All right, so now we get to Exodus. So now let's read. How much time I got, Karen?
It's 11:30, so you got.
All right, so let's begin reading from the New King James, Exodus 1:1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man in his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. There was a daughter, she's not listed, but Dinah, she would have went too. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Right there. For Joseph was in Egypt already. All right, we're going to stop right there. Exodus 1:1.
1-1.
All right, so it says that all of the descendants that went down into Egypt with Jacob, all these J's, that there was 70 that come from his loins, listing, his sons. Of course, Dinah would have been in there too. But it's interesting because in Acts 7:14, it actually says that 75 people went down to Egypt in Acts 7:14. In Genesis 46, 26, and 27, it says 70, but then it says 66 people went down with Jacob that were in his loins went down. So, was it 66? Was it 70? Or was it 75? Deuteronomy 10 and 22 says 70. Exodus 1 and 5 says 70. All right, so what is going on here? Was it 66? Was it 70? Was it 75? Well, we don't know. Okay? But what
You gotta go
the
with
scholars...
Moses, because Moses was there. I mean,
Okay.
the writings of Moses.
Okay, but the writings of Moses apparently have changed in that regard. Perhaps. Hebrew scholars say, okay, rabbis say, that in the first century, there were apparently 2 Hebrew manuscripts. This was before the Masoretic text. The people at Qumran had one, and the Jews, the leading Jews in Jerusalem had one. There were 2 circulating Hebrew manuscripts. The scroll of Exodus found at Qumran says, and I don't want to get this right, says 75. Says 75 souls went down. Acts says 75. Okay? Acts 7:14 says 75. So apparently, also the Septuagint the Greek Septuagint must have used that Hebrew manuscript, because the Greek Septuagint says 75 souls went down. Everybody with me? Okay, so Qumran Hebrew manuscript found says 75. The Greek must have used that manuscript because Septuagint says 75. Acts, Luke, when he wrote Acts, must have used that manuscript because it says 75. Okay? So then they said that what happened was, when the Masoretic text was written, that those Hebrew scholars used the other scroll text that said 70. Now, from what I understand, sometimes Hebrew numbers in the ancient Hebrew can be hard to decipher for whatever reason. And as we get to the numbers that really came out of Egypt and the Exodus, I think we're going to learn some interesting things there, okay? Because, for one, and I don't want to jump way ahead, but the population, no, let me not do that right now. Okay, so we're going to learn some interesting thing about numbers. All right, some people say that it really doesn't matter, 66, 70, or 75, because they rounded it off to 70. Okay? Because in that day and time, they, just like it says about Yeshua, he came to be about 30 years of age. So we round off numbers. So 66 would be 70, right? 75, maybe 5 wasn't the rolling up to the next like us. Maybe it's 75. It still went back to 70. So an estimate. It's really not that big of a deal, but the discrepancy is there, and that's what the Hebrews say about the scrolls.
If you're big into gematria, then it becomes a big deal.
The 70 becomes a big deal. And that could be the reason that they rounded it that way, either from 66 or 75. Because in 70 is very big deal in gematria.
And you look at God, and he is very precise with
Exactly.
every detail.
Exactly. Anyway, so I wanted to throw that in there. All right. Now let's keep reading here, because this is going to get good. It says, verse number 6, Exodus 1 and 6, and Joseph died, and all of his brothers. So Joseph was 110, all of his brothers, and all that generation. Okay, so they all die, all the brothers, they all die. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So this is where we get into the problem starts. So you might say, okay, were there so many, if we put this in our terms of how does a person forget? Well, we haven't forgotten George Washington, okay, that was over 200 years ago. So you say, how many pharaohs were there? All right, well, I'm going to briefly discuss this, and we can go there again. You can ask questions later. If you go back, even if you go to the New Testament in Galatians, okay, and if you go in Galatians 3:17, or in Exodus 12, 40 and 41, it says that they would be in bondage for 430 years. If you go back to the covenant made with Abraham, where the birds, a row of the birds cut in half, God puts a flaming fire torch down between them, the covenant was made, and Abraham has this vision, okay? He tells Abraham that your descendants are going to be in bondage for 430 years. Now, Christian and Jewish commentators all agree, okay, that they were not in Egypt for 430 years. Part of that bondage was they were in a land that they were foreigners. They were treated as foreigners. That includes the land of Canaan, because they did not control all the land of Canaan when Abraham sojourned in Canaan. So the 430 years start with the covenant of Abraham. They lived in Canaan for 215 years. They lived in Egypt for 210 years, or 215 years, okay? Sorry. They lived in Canaan for 215 years as sojourners in the land, or foreigners, and then they lived in Egypt for 215 years. Some rabbis say they lived in Canaan for 220 and in Egypt for 210. Now, I already told you that for 51 years, Joseph and his family all lived in Egypt together. So, if you subtract, we don't know what brothers lived longer than Joseph. So, for 51, 61, 70 years, I don't know for sure, till all the brothers are dead, Benjamin's the youngest, we don't know the ages of all of them when they died. So, you're looking at only 100 and something, years that the persecution began to intensify and grow. That doesn't seem like that it's a whole lot to say, well, they totally forgot about Joseph. So what else could be going on here? All right, so I did a little research, and here's the thing. And by the way, also HebrewForChristians.com says what I just told you, that the 430 years started at the covenant of Abraham, and that they only lived 215 and 215 each. All right. At the time of Joseph, and I love history, so this is good to me. At the time of Joseph, who was the Pharaoh? At the time of Joseph, the Hyksos, Hyksos, became foreign invaders. They invaded Egypt and took it over. They were Semitic kings. The Hyksos were not loved by the natural Egyptians, even though they worked very hard to improve the land. They ruled Egypt for 150 years, from 1730 to 1580 BC. At that time, Upper Egypt revolted. Okay?
Who lives in Upper Egypt?
All right, Upper Egypt revolted, and Chamos expelled the Hyksos from Upper and Middle Egypt. But their full getting them out of the land, the Hyksos, getting them out of the land, was done by his younger brother, Amos. Pharaoh Amos, he becomes Pharaoh. They were natural-born Egyptians. Amos, Ahmose, becomes king, or Pharaoh. This is the beginning. They were native-born Egyptians that got the Hyksos out of the land. Okay? This begins with Pharaoh Amos, which can also be called Moses. This begins the 18th dynasty in Egypt, when they take back over. When they took over, they did away with everything that the Hyksos, all the people that the Hyksos had put in power. They hated the ones that the Hyksos had made important, which would be Joseph, his family. Do y'all see that? So, these are the ones that knew not Joseph, because when the natural-born Egyptians took over, the Hyksos were not. They did not like foreigners. So they took the foreigners as slaves. They began to make them slaves because they had been imported under the Hyksos regime. They were not natural-born, so they began to make these not natural-born Egyptians that had been under Hyksos, they began to make them into slaves. The picture becomes more clearer here. Does everybody see that? So you have Amos, or Moses, Pharaoh, first Pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Then you have Amenhotep. Then you have Tutmos, or Tutmosis, who would have been the Pharaoh when Moses was born. We're going to get more into this one. I'm not going to have enough time today. And you always wondered who these people were? In the stories I have. But anyway, y'all may not have. Tutmosis the first. Then you have Tutmosis the second. Now, some of these people didn't rule very long. Then you have Tutmosis the third. They were all inbred. All inbred. Marrying brothers, sisters, half-brothers, half-sisters. Then, here's where it gets good. You have Hatshepsut, who was a female. She was the daughter of Amos, the first one. Hatshepsut is believed to have been that Egyptian mother of Moses. She became Pharaoh because she married her half-brother. And then when her half-brother, who was Pharaoh, Tutmosis II, died, her stepson, who was very young, baby, she became co-regent with him. Anyway, Hatshepsut, the female, becomes Pharaoh of Egypt for a short period of time. And then she has no son, and Tutmos III, a son by a lesser wife, Amenhotep, becomes Pharaoh. And Amenhotep II was the Exodus Pharaoh. Amenhotep II was defaced all the statues. It says that during Amenhotep II's reign, history says, they don't apply this to the Bible, but history says that his military somehow was demolished. Well, you ever heard of the Red Sea? They also say that he had to go out and capture new slaves because something happened to all of his slave population. Amenhotep wondered what happened to his slave population. They also say that he defaced, or had defaced, Hatshepsut's memory. You know how the Egyptians believed that the prior pharaohs, that they couldn't go into the afterlife. They believed in afterlife. They couldn't go into the afterlife successfully if their images weren't there. You know, because they all made the hieroglyphs and their tombs and all that. Amenhotep II, the Exodus Pharaoh, tried to deface all of the images of Hatshepsut, the woman Pharaoh. Why? Well, if she was Moses' stepmother, and you want to blame her for the lack of your military power, because now something's happened to all your military, and all of your slaves come up missing, then you wouldn't want her to be very successful in the afterlife, because you can't stand that woman. Because her stepson caused all this mess. And so he tried to deface Hatshepsut's images on many of the monuments. Some of them remain, but there you go. So that's pretty interesting to me. And so we'll talk some more about this because Moses' name is not Hebrew. I know they say Moshe, and they try to say it comes from a root in Hebrew and all that, which is technically all made up because Moses' name was purely Egyptian. And it means, the mess means son or born of, just like when we say bar mitzvah, the bar means son. Mess means son. Son of whoever, okay, or born of whoever. So that's where Moses got his name. Drawn out of the Nile because he was the son of the Nile. He came from the Nile. Yes, the Nile was a god. Y'all see that? He was born of the Nile. Now, Tutmos the first, which was probably the Pharaoh when Moses was born, his name is Tutmos or Tutmosis. Tutmosis. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Like Ramesses. Ra, he was son of Ra. Ra-mes, M-E-S, Ra-mes-sis. So Ramesses was son of Ra. The sun god. Okay, Ra was the sun god. So Moses was the son of the Nile. drawn out of the water. It was purely Egyptian. However, now in Exodus 2 and 2, I want to read that real quick. I'll start at verse 1. Exodus 2 and 1, it says, And a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. That's Moses. But he wasn't given that name Moses yet. But they would have given Moses a name. Well, what could have, this is Lisa 101, what could have been his name? Well, she says that he was a beautiful child. Well, most of the time, the women we find so far in history, they did the naming of the child, right? And it usually had something to do with what they were called. If you go back to Jacob's children, Leah and Rachel, named them by what they called them when they were born. Surely my husband will love me. Well, that's what that son's name meant, right? So she says here, he's a goodly child. Well, there's a name, there's a Hebrew name. Lee has a dog by that name. That means good, Tavi. So there's a possibility that Moses' Hebrew name was Tavi. He's a goodly child, Tavi. Fiddler on the roof, Tavi. Okay? But of course, when he was become a son of the Nile, drawn out of the Nile, his name is, and we know him as Moses, or Moshe. Now, that's all for today because my time is up. But we'll continue here next week and get into more of what happens when there arose a Pharaoh, Tutmos the first, Tutmosis the first, who knew not Joseph.
And you said Amos was Pharaoh when?
He was the beginning Pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Ahmose. And then Amenhotep. We can take a break. Just saying, I'm answering questions, but y'all take your little break right here. And then it was Amenhotep, Amenhotep.
You don't have to.
Oh, okay.
In the Mummy movie, they pronounce it Amenhotep.
Well, Amenhotep, Amenhotep, whatever you want to say it. He's the one.
He's a man.
He's the man.
That's where he gets his history.
Yeah.
From Hollywood.
See, I love history.